Hi, everyone. Welcome to our midterm review session. Couple of things. While I don't require that you have your camera on, it is always nice to see your faces. There's no pressure for that. I know things are weird right now, and they've been weird for a while. But still, if you're feeling uncomfortable and you'd prefer not to have the camera on, you don't need to. Okay. The other thing I'd like to say is sometimes I get going with lecturing about stuff. So if you have a question and I happen to be lecturing at that time, I would encourage you to type your question into the chat. Okay, sometimes I call the chat a parking lot. So feel free to park your questions there. Otherwise, though, I would hope that you could just pop in, unmute yourself, and go ahead and ask the question. So for today, talking about the midterm, this session is going to be led by whatever questions that you have. And those questions can be related to the lecture content or the readings. They could also be related to the structure of the exam. It's up to you. So any burning questions we can get started with now? Do you all feel pretty prepared for the midterm? I hope it's not a surprise. I've been trying to remind you all, you have a midterm coming up this week.
The poetry stuff is, I think, the most difficult part
Okay.
for me right now. So I've been trying to go over that as much as I can.
Have you been returning to the practice quiz questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any practice quiz questions that are kind of tricky? Why don't I share my screen? And sure why it's not allowing me to share my screen. Huh. Well, I apologize. It is not allowing me to. Let's see if I can change the setting really quickly here. Maria, if you would go to the practice quiz in the module, I believe that's the week 4 module. That was the week when we reviewed Gloria Ansvaldua's work. And you were to pull up those quiz questions. That would be helpful because then I could work with you directly on any one of those questions that's stumping you. Okay. I do want to take this time to offer that general tip. I'm not going to ask you any question that you haven't already seen or one that isn't available to you. Okay. So all of the practice quiz questions, that's the pool of questions that I will take from for the midterm. The best way that you can prepare is to go through each of those practice quizzes and to make sure that you can answer those questions. Okay. Maria, was there anything from the practice quiz for that week? Not the whether it's about Gloria Anzaldúa or whether it's about the poetry terms that was kind of tricky for you.
Yeah. So I have a problem with like the stress patterns.
Okay.
Specifically in like the question in the for the quiz.
So let's see, I will pull it up here. Unfortunately, I cannot share it with you because I downloaded new software to my computer and it changed my settings. And I am not the quickest person to adjust my settings while I'm talking during a midterm session. All right, so let's take a look at this. This is Poetry and Scansion lecture quiz. And I'll do a preview of the quiz here. All right, so sometimes I will ask you to scan something, right? The very first question here is please scan the verse lines from William Blake's poem, The Tiger. Now, I believe that I actually posted a scanned version of that to the same lecture page. So you can practice on your own, and then you can kind of check that out yourself, okay? when we're doing stress patterns, if you notice that your jaw is dropping, right, then you're probably hitting a stressed syllable. Tiger, tiger, okay? What does that sound like to you? Stress, opening with a stress or opening with an unstressed? Tiger.
A stress.
Yes, right. And you can see my mouth drop, right? Tiger. Okay. So one, you can think of it as a physical cue, right? How is your mouth moving? Um, and the other thing is you can play with mispronouncing the word or pronouncing it in different ways, right? Like, is it tiger, right? Uh, if we pronounced it that way, at least as I'm experiencing it, the stress would be on the second syllable, and that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound natural, doesn't sound like what the poem is going for here. So I would check out the video that I posted with the English instructor talking about different tips for understanding stresses. I don't want you, this is an opportunity for a pun, so I got to take it. I don't want you to get stressed out over this. So uh, keep up with just a few of the basic things, right? Iambic, right, and trochaic are important to know. I didn't want to overwhelm you with the stresses. And the other thing you should keep in mind here is if I give you a question, right, um, there are a total of 25 questions for this exam. Um, I believe the point value for the exam is 50 points, okay? So that means no one question is going to be worth more than 2 points, right? So keep that in mind when you are thinking about the value of each question and how much time to spend on it, okay? So use that information to help you be strategic about how to do this, okay? It looks like here, how many questions on scanning do I have? I've got one question on scanning. What's the meter of the first 4 lines of William Blake's Tiger, right? And I provided you with those first 4 lines. What's the stress pattern, right? And it looks like there are at most 2 questions related to this, Maria. So for one, I hope that it helps reduce pressure to see how much of this exam that will involve, okay? And 2, when checking your understanding of the stress that you heard, right, you're spot on with it, okay? Were there any other questions about stress or about the poetry that I can help with?
No, I can't think of anything else about scansion.
Okay.
But
Does
yeah,
that
that's very
information
helpful.
help a little bit more?
Yeah,
Keep it in
yeah, it's very
perspective?
helpful.
Yeah, this is not a scansion test, okay? This is not a poetry class. And you guys, to be honest, I don't know if it came through in my writing of the lectures or not, but I get just as nervous as at least for those of you who have shared this, right? I get just as nervous as you all do with scansion. There are my area of specialty was not poetry. However, I do feel it's my responsibility teaching you literature that I want to know every student who's had me has had some exposure to some basics of poetry, right? My experience with poetry, little bit in some grad classes, but teaching the undergrads at UCLA, working with the professors who are very knowledgeable about poetry, these are some of the basic structures of poetry that we would teach them. And that the professors made sure that myself as a grad student at the time as a TA would know, okay? So this is like if you went to UCLA and you took the 10 series, if you went to any university and you took their introductory survey to literature course and you encountered poetry, these are some of the terms that you would be encountering there, okay? So these are practical in that sense if you're an English major. If you're just someone who appreciates poetry, I think they can be useful too, because they teach you a traditional way of analyzing poetry. But let's keep in mind here that we have 2 other outstanding writers and we have about 5 other weeks of material, okay? So while I understand some concern about the scansion, I also want to assuage any fears that you have about how much of an emphasis it's going to be on the test, okay? 1 or 2 questions at the most for you to know stress patterns, okay? I do think it's useful to know some of the other terms like enjambment and end-stopped lines, right? But that's a matter of understanding the presence of punctuation or the absence of it. Um, Understanding rhyme scheme can be helpful too. Uh, so, but again, there are 5 other weeks of lecture material to kind of consider, and stick to the practice quiz questions. So Maria, thank you for jumping out there and for starting with that question. Other questions that I can help with? Other questions about the structure of the exam? Diana, thank you for jumping on. I saw you pop in a little bit later. I appreciate your time. Grace, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do remember like in one of your lecture notes,
Mhm.
it said like the midterm will have like a focus on um hold on, let me try to see if I oh darn. It said something like, oh, like the books that we're reading focus on the fact that they may not be a reliable narrator.
Well, yes, you're thinking of the lecture about narrative perspective, and the unreliable narrator is one of those options that an author can choose from. Okay, so something important to know with the unreliable narrator. And Grace, I'm not going to put it just on you for answering this, but do you guys think that the unreliable narrator is a omniscient narrator, a third person perspective, or do you think it's a first person perspective?
The autobiography?
The unreliable narrator. Yeah, which one do you think it is?
Oh, um, the unreliable narrator, that'd be first person.
Yes, exactly, right. And I think that's probably the most important thing to know about the unreliable narrators, that they're first person perspectives. They're very limited with with the information that they have available to them, and they often reveal more about their own character through the conclusions that they jump to. I really love the Oregon State University Department, English Department's video collection, and the professor who gave that little presentation on the unreliable narrator. Okay. Now, I have not pinned down any. I have refrained. I try to refrain from giving my own analysis of the texts because I didn't. When I was an undergraduate, when I was taking classes, I felt like sometimes professors imposed their views, and then they presented it as if this was the only way to see it. And what I would feel more comfortable with is presenting you all with tools that I'm familiar with, and then you can use these tools and apply them, right? So I won't be asking any analysis questions though, right? So Grace, it might be useful for you to think, if you're interested in this notion of narrative perspective, later on down the line when we write a paper, right, it might be useful to think in terms of which of our characters is an unreliable narrator. Okay, but I won't be asking that question on the midterm because I don't believe I asked that as a practice quiz question. I think I did have a question about what is an unreliable narrator. So you probably should be able to define it, but I don't believe I asked for you to apply that label to any one of our current characters. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, because I was wondering like what the format was gonna be, and it
Mm-hmm.
turns out that it's like question like so that's good. But if there is an essay that you need to know that, then I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, just at the end of the semester, there will be a 5-page paper, right? So that's not something to worry about for now. There will not be any essay questions on this midterm. It's all short answer, okay? With those practice quizzes, what you see is what you get, okay? Now, the thing is, you don't know which questions I'm going to ask, okay? So, but it's early in the week, it's Tuesday. Ideally, week by week, you've been reviewing the questions, if not answering them, at least being aware of what those questions are. But now is the time to go in and to try your best to answer each of those questions. Let me take this opportunity to say it's not about how long your responses are. It's about the precision of the response. So please be specific. Please be detailed in your response. But sometimes a detailed and specific response can be very short. I remember having a math student in my Mexican literature and translation course a couple of years ago. I was always amazed by how concise he was. He could pack a lot of information in. He chose his words well. So I don't want anyone to think that you have to write a lot for each of these questions. What I need is the right information, okay? And that's where preparing earlier in the week is better, because as you are going through and looking at these practice quiz questions, if you run into one that gives you pause, that causes you to think, I'm not certain how to answer that, email me, okay? Email me and let me know which question is stumping you. And, depending on the kind of question that you have, I'd even be open to setting up a one-on-one meeting, okay? It just depends on your level of interest and what needs to be accomplished. But nonetheless, prepare early, find out what the limits are of your knowledge, right? Which questions are you confident with and which ones are you not? And the ones that you're not, okay, do a little more work with. And if you're still not certain, then, check in with me and I'd be happy to, like I said, I'd be happy to check your response, okay? I cannot tell you whether that question will appear on the midterm, but I can tell you, I can kind of assess the quality of your response. So anyway. Great. Other questions about the structure of the exam or about lecture themes and topics that we've encountered? Does anyone have questions about the irony lecture? I know when teaching this class in the past, the scansion definitely causes some trouble. I do get some questions about narrative perspective. I think irony is the other one where I get some questions. Do we all feel good about the different kinds of irony that are available to us? Remember that irony is basically a difference between appearance and reality, a departure from expectations, right? So keep that in mind. And there were 3 or 4 different kinds of irony that I talked about in lecture. There is situational, structural, dramatic, and verbal. The one that students confuse most often, and from my experience, has been situational irony and structural irony. Please remember that those are 2 different things. They are not the same thing, okay? Any questions about the irony lecture and distinguishing any of these terms?
Professor?
Yes, hi Dana.
Hi. About irony, how would we be able to know what situational irony is in literature? Because I have trouble with that, because it's easy to see it in a show, but it's harder to see it in a book or read it in a book.
Right. What I would recommend with irony is kind of creating a checklist, right? You need to keep in mind a few things. You as the reader are on that checklist, right? Because the author, having created this for people to read, is aware of what are some maybe basic expectations, okay? So you've got the reader on that list, you have the author on that list, and then you have the characters in the story. When it comes to situational irony, the opposite of what you expect has occurred. And that's probably because the character has shared with us what their own intentions are. So when a character shares their plans, and then they go about trying to make these plans happen, and then the opposite effect occurs, then you have situational irony. The Oregon State University Department's video was very helpful in this regard. The professor used the Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Cask of Amontillado. And there are 2 characters in that story. And one character intends to kill the other character. But this character, the one who intends to kill the other one, is pretending to be a friend. So already we have a contrast between the appearance of friendship and the reality of the conspiracy to murder, right? Now, we don't get a lot of detail. It's been a while since I read the story, So part of my memory is based on what was included in the video. We don't get a lot of detail on why. We'll just say character A wants to kill character B. But what we do know is that he has this desire to do that. And so the character A shares with the reader what his plans are, right? How he's going to go and murder the character B. And the way that he wants to do it's really important. It's important that the character B understands that he is being killed. It's not enough that character A kills character B, but that he has to know that it's character A who has deceived him. It's character A that has done him in, right? So there's this sense of revenge to it. But what the professor points out to us is that this whole time he's kind of getting character B drunk. So if his intention is to not only kill character B, but that character B becomes aware that it was character A who has led him to his demise, it's kind of not exactly happening the way the character has planned it to happen. Because if the character is so drunk that he's unconscious and unaware, then how can character B know that it was character A who designed this whole plot? So when you see, so I'll write this in here, situational irony occurs when a character's plans are foiled. Okay, so you have to have a character that has plans, right? They have to share them with us somehow, and then they have to work on them. When the opposite effect happens, right, that's when there's something ironic going on. Okay, Diana, does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see for that checklist, you need a character and you need plans, and then the opposite effect of those plans needs to occur. So at least 3 things on that checklist, okay? When it comes to dramatic irony, right, the reader is on that checklist and the author's on that checklist. Those 2 share information that the characters do not have, right? And the TED Ed video, I think, is very useful in that regard. It says, do you feel like you're in on a secret? Right? You're in on a secret with the creator of the film that the characters aren't in on. Okay, that's dramatic irony. That's really important to know too. Verbal irony is very common, right? When we say something but we mean the opposite of that, right? Sarcasm is a great example of verbal irony. Okay, structural irony is when we have a character that continues, like the character is usually the hero of the story. They continue to assess things in ways that are unreasonable. Bad things keep happening, only the character sees them as good things, right? So there are some examples I gave. Voltaire's Candide is one that I remembered, but we don't really see that in any of our stories, although I'd be happy for someone to point that out. But usually it's in the form of satire. If anyone has read Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, there we have a spokesperson who is suggesting something horrible as a way to solve a population problem. We assume to know that the author, right, doesn't share the same views as the writer. Sorry, as the spokesperson. So when the narrator or the spokesperson is evaluating things in ways that are completely unreasonable, that depart from common expectations, then we've got structural irony. But again, that's with a narrator, a spokesperson, a hero, okay? All right, other elements to the lecture or to the midterm that we should review. I'm really appreciative of the questions you all are asking about lecture. When I do midterm sessions with other classes, they tend to just focus on the exam, the structure of the exam, and they leave out the important stuff, which is the stuff we've gone over in lecture. Last thing, just while it's up in my mind, I will probably ask you more lecture questions than I will ask you reading questions, okay? At the very least, it would be 50-50, but I'll probably tend to lean more on the lecture side, okay? I wanna make sure that you are reviewing those lecture materials and rewarding those students who have done that too, so. Imagine it being out of those 25 questions, probably close to 15 of them Okay, will probably be more from lecture. All right. Okay. Other questions? I don't believe I've said this yet. The exam's somewhere between 75 and 80 minutes. I will double check on that and I'll post an announcement. Remember, it's 25 questions. It should be 50 points. And remember, they're all short answer. I will not be asking you to analyze anything here. And you won't have any multiple choice. Maybe sometimes one or two pops up, but most of these will be short answer. So, and I will say then, I know some of the practice quiz questions are framed as multiple choice. In those, obviously in those events, sometimes I change those. Generally, the questions are the same. Sometimes just to make the formatting consistent, they'll be adjusted a little bit. But you have all the questions that I'll be asking you. Okay, everyone, if there are no other questions, then we can end it here. And like I said, if you think of anything else later in the week, feel free to email me. Remember that everything is going to be shut down on the course website Thursday at midnight. And Friday morning, the exam will be available, I'd say 8 a.m. And you'll have those 3 days from Friday to Sunday to log in and to complete the exam. Once you open the exam, the clock will start to run. Okay, so do not open the exam until you've got a stable internet connection and about an hour and 15 to an hour and 20 minutes to yourself, where you can really focus and get it done. You can take it anytime between Friday at 8 a.m. and Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Keep in mind that if you were to start the exam at 11 p.m. on Sunday, you would only have 59 minutes. You would not get the full hour and 15 or hour and 20. All right? Okay, well, I appreciate your time. Thank you all for coming. Like I said, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to email me. All right. I wish you all the best of luck. Okay, talk to you in the future. Take care.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.